disabled people have typically not been included. Our voices are not heard as they should be.
It's sitting pretty, baby.
What is up, y'all? It's your girl Lolo, and it is Women History Month. Isn't that so exciting? Today, I am about to talk to one of the most influential, legendary, powerhouse women, revolutionary women in history. I am talking about Judy Heumann. Judy Heumann. You guys, I'm so excited to be able to speak with her because what she has done for disability, for this country to even have an ADA exist is absolutely incredible. If you have not read her book, Being Human, then you are absolutely slipping in life. Read her book. All right, y'all, let's get Judy on the line. Boom. Ready? Are you ready, Judy?
I am.
I think we just want to start at the beginning and really kind of paint a picture for people who don't know, whether they have a disability or not. What was life really like for your generation and everyone that experienced life as a person with a disability prior to the ADA?
Well, I have to go back much earlier than prior to the ADA, because the ADA was 1990, and I was born in 1947.
Yes, let's go there.
I grew up in Brooklyn, and the reason I emphasize, being from Brooklyn in New York, there is, in my mind, a real truth to the fact that life in big cities is difficult for everybody. I love New York and everything about it, miss not living there. But it also made me a much stronger person because change happened across the board as people who wanted change to happen were willing to fight for it. Because there are so many things that needed to be done on a daily basis, that the softer and the quieter you are, the less likely things are to happen. Now, is that the way things should be? No, but it's the reality of the way it is in this country and in many countries around the world. So when I had polio in 1949, when I was about 18 months old, my parents apparently had been told by a doctor when I was about 2 that they should put me in an institution and just go forward with their life. My mother already had another son, and later on, my parents had my third sibling, my brother Ricky. And they were really beginning to learn that they didn't really know what laws were. I mean, they knew what a law was, but they weren't thinking about laws to protect the rights of disabled people because they didn't necessarily think that there needed to be protection of disabled people. They didn't know any. And so, when my mom took me to school and the principal said I couldn't go there because I'd be a fire hazard, I'm sure that was quite upsetting to her and my father.
Right.
And there were no laws. And, like many families, even if there was a law, they might not know about it or they might not know what to do.
Right.
So that's really, obviously when I was 5, I wasn't like analyzing everything that was happening.
Right.
I could see the progression between when I was 5 and then when I finally got into a school when I was 9 years old, although the classes I went to were segregated, only disabled kids in the classes. And for the various barriers that I would experience, when I finally started going to school, my parents, I met other disabled kids, but my parents met other parents who had disabled kids. And I think it was important for the parents to meet other parents and be able to talk about things they couldn't talk about with us.
Yeah.
As kids,
Absolutely.
And so that was what was supposed to happen. If you went to high school, another story, in the classes I went to, kids were there until they were 21 years old. Wow. The regular school went up to the 6th grade, but the special ed classes frequently had kids up to the age of 21. They didn't even go to high school. So my mom and other moms fought with the Board of Ed to get them to make some of the high schools accessible. So I was the first kid in my special ed health conservation 21 class to go to high school.
Wow.
First one. And then other kids behind me went to high school. I think it's difficult for people today to really realize what life was like before Section 504, before the Americans with Disabilities Act and other laws. And really, I think the movement itself started emerging after the end of the Second World War, when more veterans, disabled veterans, came home and were really beginning to become active on issues of physical accessibility and benefits and things like that.
Wow. There's so much that you just dropped on me right now that I'm like, I still have to get to question 2. And then for you to be the first student to go to high school, to me that just rang, so Judy was like really born to be a leader. She was the first to do it all, like in a sense.
That was my mother and the parents. I mean, right? So I benefited, and my friend Frida and Michael and Neil and Stevie and all these guys. But if it hadn't been for our parents, we would have stayed. Well, we would have gone home and had home instruction during high school.
Wow.
So I think, you could see, and this is for parents, I think also, to really recognize that it is important for parents to fight for the rights of their kids.
Yes.
And it's also important for parents to know when it's time for them to back off.
Yeah.
And allow the kids to move forward so that the kids are not being, overshadowed by the parents.
So, you talked about camp and, and I saw Crip Camp, which is an amazing, amazing documentary. And I just thought that the camp was like so dope. I was just like, damn, I would have loved to like see what that was like back then, you know what I mean? Or be a part of that. So what was the importance of camp for you as your development as an adult?
I think camp was important for me because I was with my peers, and some of them were older than I was. And so, both at school, when I was in high school, there were kids that were older than I was, and at camp, there were kids that were older and younger than I was. So being able to be with people who had more experience than I did was always helpful. It would allow me to kind of think and talk about issues of where I wanted to be going, and to talk about how I was concerned because not seeing disabled people in jobs, not seeing disabled people on television, or reading about us, in a meaningful way, not as hopeless, helpless cripples and telethons and things like that.
Right.
So camp really was a place where we could be ourselves. And I think that was very important because at camp, I wasn't shy. I was, wasn't shy at all.
Yeah, you were doing the damn thing at camp. According to the documentary, I was like, oh, Judy's all up in this place. Okay.
No, it's like, it was just my community.
Yeah.
And it's not, I felt very much a part of my family. We had a great family and cousins and, uncles and aunts and things like that. But camp was really different.
I love it.
And, not real life, but for the years that I went there really helped me grow and become more of who I am.
I love that. With camp, you guys are having a good time, y'all chilling, turning up, everything, right? What made you decide to take on more of a leadership role at camp?
I never decided it. It's just, it's just something that happened. I never decided to be a leader in any way. I think we were just doing different things, and we were now not just at camp, but when I went to California and began to be involved at both in graduate school and at the Center for Independent Living, there when I got to CIL, it was very empowering because I had a lot of ideas and I liked the people that were there and we were creative together. And so we really fed off each other. I think that's one thing about camp and in the city in New York, being with other disabled people of similar mind, we fed off each other. We could relate, we could talk about the impact of discrimination. And discrimination was quite broad, the denial of the right to go to school, lack of accessible buses and trains, lack of interpreters, lack of whatever it was. And in many ways, we were finally acknowledging that it was conscious, that, there were choices being made. And our movement was so weak that we really were not yet able to impact things like policies that new buildings would be accessible, buses would be accessible, the subways would be accessible. Things happened and there was very little that was happening as a result of it. And so ADA, obviously very important, but really the laws started coming about in the 1970s with Section 504 and other laws in 73, and then the regulations with 77, the Centers for Independent Living legislation in 78. All of those things are very important. And quite frankly, it is unlikely that the ADA would have come about in 1990 had there not been a Section 504.
Yeah.
Many of the questions that needed to be addressed, like who is a person with a disability? What is an accommodation? What is discrimination? Many of those questions are what were being answered in the 504 statute and regulations. So ADA expanded it because it covered the private sector, but it really ran off the base of Section 504.
So with that and you guys organizing this revolution that would, be the reason, the catalyst for Section 504 passing, sometimes, okay, I'll just use myself as an example. As a content creator, sometimes I feel like really overwhelmed with so many things that I still feel like needs to improve or needs to change or everything else for people with disabilities. There's so much to talk about all the time when it comes to representing people with disabilities. And for me, so I tend to sometimes get overwhelmed by it. How did you guys know where to even start? You know what I mean? There's just so much to tackle. What made you decide, this is what we're gonna start, this is what we're gonna do, and we're gonna, not give a f*** about nobody or what they have to say about it?
So I would say, I always viewed in the earlier days that it was like going into a candy store.
Yeah.
Because there were, exactly as you're saying, there were so many things that needed to be done, and the candies represented, those different things.
Yeah.
So pick whichever 5 you wanted, you wouldn't be wrong.
Right.
I think really what we started doing, like with Disabled in Action in New York, and with groups like Eastern Paralyzed Veterans of Association in New York, Disabled in Action, when we first formed and with our board, we kind of allowed people in the organization to decide what they wanted to work on. So we had a committee on sheltered workshops. We had a committee on transportation, a committee on telethons. because there were people in the organization that were interested in working on changes. Now, was that the most scientific way of doing things? Probably not. But at the end of the day, partly what we were trying to do was to be responding to what disabled people in the group felt was important.
Yeah.
And then if you felt it was important, you'd put energy behind it. Over the years, things have become, more focused. But, when you look at centers for independent living, for example, those organizations are more often than not very multifaceted.
Right.
Because, they're working with disabled people who may want to be living in the community, if they're not already, need personal assistance, need help in finding people, are blind or deaf or have an intellectual disability, whatever. They may need help in finding a house. They may need to know about wheelchair repair. They may need to know about benefits, how to find a job, all these different things. And I think the centers really have tried to embrace the multifaceted nature of who we are as disabled people. How to decide what to do really was based on our desires and our knowledge. And over time, really being able to continue to expand our knowledge. So transportation became a very big issue across the country.
Yeah.
And why? Because it's so essential.
Absolutely.
People travel. If you don't have a car, the need to use public transportation becomes even more important. And so many of these things were a combination of need-based, something we needed in order to be able to live our lives as we wanted. And I think people recognize that you couldn't leave it up to somebody else. In order to show that there was a demand and a need for, let's say, transportation, you needed to be able to produce people who would come out and say, you are discriminating against me because I can't walk up the steps, and I'm not going to take that anymore.
Yeah.
And then working on it and coming up with, what should the policy and law look like?
Right.
How are we going to deal with it? So
knowing that you guys have your mission, you decide we're going to take over this damn building. And we're not leaving until this gets passed, right? Kind of describe the moment where you realized there's no turning back. We can't go back anymore. This is it. We're in this now. It's over. We have to push through this. Describe what that moment was like and how you continue past that feeling.
So actually, for me, I think I was on the board of the American Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities. And I met in, I think, February of '77 in Washington, D.C. And many of us had supported Jimmy Carter's presidency and had been told that they would support signing the 504 regulations.
Mm-hmm.
So we were hearing Eunice Fiorito, who was the chairperson of the organization, and Frank Bowe, who was the executive director, had been having meetings with people in the new administration and were feeling that we didn't know when the regulations were going to be signed.
Mm.
And so at our board meeting in February, we just said, we passed a motion that said if the regulations were not signed by a certain date, that there would be demonstrations around the country. For me, in some way, that was the no turning back moment. Now, we could have turned back at many other moments, but I think once we took that vote, to me, it was, there is no turning back.
Wow.
Now, we were creating, as we were moving forward, what was going to happen. And did we ultimately know? Of course, we didn't ultimately know what was going to happen. And as the story unfolded in San Francisco Bay Area, that feeling of we cannot turn back was something that struck most of the people in the building. That if this fell apart, that it was going to really be the death knell for many of the things we wanted to do. A lot of the stuff that we were saying, Lolo, and doing was like, did that really come out of my mouth?
Right.
Did I really say these things? But it was very clear that there was remember the 150 people in the building, we didn't all know each other.
Right.
And so, but we were all there for a reason. We were there for a personal reason, but we were there for a collective reason, because we really felt that we could make a difference. And in the end, we needed ACCD in the entire organization. But I think the Bay Area really played the most influential role for many reasons. But I think ultimately we got the football over the pole.
Yes, I love that.
The last 2 points or 3 points or whatever you get when you kick it over there.
Yes, the field goal. Yes, absolutely.
Field goal, thank you.
Yes. I love it. I love that so much. And for me personally, that makes me so excited to know that that one, there was this like undeniable fight. Like you were saying, like you're saying all these things and you're like, oh shit, am I really saying this? Are we really, like, this is what we're really about to do? Is incredible to me. But even on a personal level, I'm from Stockton, California. So knowing that the Bay Area is like a big cousin to my city per se, and knowing that this happened in the Bay is like, yes, of course it happened in the Bay. The Bay is the shit. So for me, I was very excited about that personally. And then of course, learning the influence that the Black Panther Party had in supporting the demonstration was even more touching to me, just, as a Black woman and the history of the Panther Party and everything else, and knowing that they had such support of the demonstrators was like, my heart exploded. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So like, how did they get involved? Like, what did they tell y'all? Like what was that?
Brad Lomax, who's in the film, was one of the founding members of the Black Panthers, and he had MS.
Got it.
So it's because of Brad that they got involved.
I love it.
And which I think was very important, because he was a part of the work that was being done, and like work that others were doing who were involved with women's groups and labor unions and things. It was bringing all these different components together. So the Black Panthers obviously played a very important role by really making sure that people had food every day. I would say, now that we've lived through a year of COVID,
right,
it's a little similar, not identical, but similar, because you could get up and leave the building. They made it difficult to get back in, but sometimes people did get back in. But ostensibly, the people who came into the building were making a decision to try to stay until it was finished. And we didn't know, there wasn't a date. Everything's finished on this date. That wasn't the way it was.
Right. Section 504 passes. Describe that feeling.
Well, remember, the law passed in 73.
Mm-hmm.
This was the signing of the regulations.
Right.
The signing of the regulations was critically important, because it meant that the law could be implemented.
Right.
The law was in effect, and there was a man named Jim Cherry, but he had filed a lawsuit using the statute prior to the regs coming out. But the regulations were very important, because they allowed clear thinking and definitions, and you know, who was a person with a disability? What was discrimination? What were remedies? Very important things that we didn't have answers to. And so the regulations really enabled trainings to happen and negotiations to occur through mediation and litigation to occur. And we couldn't have done it without that. So we felt, well, it was Joe Califano, who was the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, signed the regulations in secret. Basically at a signing ceremony in his office with staff, invited no one from the community in. He was very offended, apparently, that when the 30 to 50 people from San Francisco, about 24, 25 of us, and then there were people from other parts of the country, when we came to Washington and we went to his house to demonstrate, he was very upset. And he never, ever picked up the phone to thank anybody who was involved with this work for the efforts and that he wanted to work together. He never did that. So we learned, I was in DC with my friend Pat, Lisa, and Ann, and a number of others. The others had gone home. The vast majority of the demonstrators who had come from San Francisco to Washington went back home before the regs were signed. And it was kind of anticlimactic in one way because there wasn't a ceremony. We weren't invited to come. We learned about it from somebody else, but I didn't go back to San Francisco because I had another meeting, but everybody else went back. And you can see in the film how very happy people were. And it was a jubilant happiness.
Yeah.
Because they really, everybody in that building knew that they made a difference.
Yeah.
Unequivocally, every person who stayed in the building made a difference. They put their life on the line for something that they really believed in, and it really made them, both as a community and as individuals, feel proud of who they were.
With you having such an integral part of the movement and, the revolution, how much do you think has changed since then? And how much more do you think can change going into the future?
Well, I would say there are many things that have changed significantly in the built environment and in the area of technology, although there's still much that needs to be done. But those, I think, are very important areas of progress is being made. And it is enabling a whole host of people who, like yourself and myself, before there were accessible buses, as an example, things that we weren't able to do.
Yeah.
So the changes of the built environment, new buildings being accessible, shopping malls being accessible, maybe we ever get back to them. Fitting rooms and bathrooms and movie theaters where we could sit in our wheelchairs, where captioning and audio description is now available in many movie theaters, and laws and various things that are changing that give us rights that we didn't have before or that we weren't granted before. But there's so much more that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And, there are issues like being able to have appropriate funding for home and community-based services. Money so that people who need personal assistance can live in their homes, get their homes made accessible, be able to have sufficient funding to hire the people that they need or making appropriate wages, interpreter services, whatever kinds of support that people need with and without visible disabilities. So we have so much further to go. And I think there's no reason why our goal isn't really ending discrimination against disabled people, regardless of disability or race or religion or ethnicity or sexual orientation. And really a continuing and a discussion that has to be much more robust, where communities who are fighting for change need to recognize that disabled people have typically not been included. Our voices are not heard as they should be. And many of the organizations that are rights-based groups are not really being inclusive of disabled people either.
Right.
So to me, it is very important that these other major groups really are embracing and recognizing that disabled people should be much more prominent parts of the groups that, of the groups they're working with.
Would you recommend that we take over another government building and make some happen, or what are you thinking?
I don't think it's a need at this point to take over a government building, but I think it is the need for us to be able to capture more people's minds. Yeah. And that, for me, Black Lives Matter has been a major issue of importance in the last year.
100%.
Because of the tragedies that brought the movement again to the forefront in a much stronger way. And making people think in ways that we hadn't always thought, or we'd thought about but not continued fighting for these kinds of changes. And I want to hear the word disability coming out of every movement leader, not just the mouths of disabled people.
Right.
Every other group. And I want to see people who look like the group with disabilities as spokespersons and visibly a part of what's happening. That to me is what's critically important. And it's not going to change overnight. And we really do need to be getting much more in touch with the biases and discrimination that exist within our different communities to fight against those.
Yeah.
And to work together.
What are you most excited about for the next generation of people with disabilities, and what you feel our potential impact can be, and all of those things? Like, what is kind of like your message to the next generation, and what are you most excited about?
So for me, the next generation is not just younger people. And the reason I say that is the larger number of people who are acquiring disabilities are people middle-aged and older. Mm-hmm. So what I would like to see is more of an intergenerational movement where people with disabilities, people with, like you and I, we are people who basically, I can't speak for you, but for me, I don't think about myself as a non-disabled person.
Right.
I don't fantasize as a non-disabled person.
Exactly. Me neither.
I don't dream as a non-disabled person. What do I dream about? Having enough personal assistance, having things accessible, not having to rely on people who really don't want to be helping me with what I need. Being able to get out and about and just do things that other people take for granted. I also feel that those of us who have our disabilities longer need to be playing a much stronger role in helping newly disabled people kind of make it across the ledge, to be able to learn about the changes that may go on in their lives, the supports that they may need, the ability to talk to other people about those changes in their life and how it makes them feel, and enable people to see that we all should be activists. We all need to be speaking up and out and being a part of the struggle for reform, not just in disability, but across the board. So really, the expanding dialogue that is going on in the country around from the voices of people who've been oppressed and excluded and now are really speaking up about what needs to happen, that being a I'm going to use the word rainbow. Maybe that's not the best word, but I mean, I think it's really the diversity of who we are. And it's more than just seeing, because as we've been discussing, so many people have invisible disabilities.
Right.
The ability of people with and without visible disabilities to know each other. And I think that's a very important issue, that within the disability community ourselves, we have biases towards others. And I think we really need to be working much more closely to be able to be supportive of all of our community and help all of our community fight for what we need.
I love it. Mic drop moment with that answer. Judy, thank you so much. This was even more incredible than I thought it was going to be. I am so thankful and so honored that you spoke with me today. This is so exciting.
Don't be thankful and don't be honored. I'm honored that you asked me to come speak. I love the dialogue that we've had. And that's what I think we need to be having more of, is dialogues where, formal and informal, where people can really let their hair down and can really talk in a more honest and, thoughtful way, be happy and sad and angry and whatever, and look at where we are, where we want to be in our own lives and within the community, and really continue to fight for those changes.
Exactly. I love that so much. Thank you again so much for joining me. This is everything I wanted it to be and more. So I'm so excited. Thank you so much.
We'll stay in touch.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. So exciting. Yes. Oh my gosh, that was amazing. Judy is absolutely amazing. She dropped so much gems in this conversation. I hope you all learned from it, and I hope you all are inspired to start your revolution, start your movement, start your group, your support group. Go out there. I mean, it is a pandemic, so do it safely, but really find creative ways to get together and commune so we can really start advocating for people with disabilities moving forward, and being able to recognize our own biases and push those off to the side so that way we could really represent for the needs that we have. I hope you guys all were inspired. Again, please make sure you read her book. Make sure you watch Crip Camp on Netflix. It is an amazing documentary about the disability revolution. Judy Heumann, a legend. It's Women's History Month, y'all. Just get your life. Peace.